remember where I was on 9/11. I was absolutely shocked by it. I was terrified. Was that just the first two buildings knocked down in what was going to be a cataclysmic world war? What could we do to stop the terrorists? In the United States, they passed the Patriot Act. The United Kingdom has had a series of laws. One of them is called the Terrorism Act. And there's a provision in the Terrorism Act that I've come to know a little bit because my friend Tommy Robinson was charged under it. I call it the ticking time bomb clause. That's just me who uses that nickname. And what it does is it allows police to arrest anyone at a port of entry into the UK. So it could be a railway station for the Channel, could be an airport, and to detain them without a search warrant. And to detain them in a way that is unique in British, American, Canadian law. That is to compel them to answer questions. You can't say, I won't talk without my lawyer present. You can't say, I plead the fifth. That would be a U.S. phrase. You can't say, I have the right to remain silent. You specifically do not. Not only must you answer the questions, but you must give them access to your documents, including to the cell phone password on your phone, where so much of our lives are. Imagine if someone, especially police with some expertise in how to look, got you to give them the password to your phone. They could access everything from your family photos to your group chats to your browsing history. Getting access to your phone is getting access to your entire life, including perhaps your banking information, your GPS tracking. It is a terrifying law. If you look at it through the lens of 9/11, perhaps it makes sense. Imagine you arrest Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or some criminal mastermind who knows a bomb is about to go off in a matter of hours. You want to be able to press him for answers without him clamming up. I get it. But more and more, that law is used not for terrorists, and not even where there's a pretense or a suspicion of terrorism, but rather simply to grill political and journalistic opponents of the Prime Minister. I say again, our friend Tommy Robinson is facing a prosecution under the Terrorism Act because when he was pulled over, he refused to give the password to his cell phone, saying there were journalistic sources he wanted to protect from police, including young girls who had been raped as part of these British rape gangs, and they did not trust police with their identity. Well, this law is being abused more and more. I saw on X the other day that a journalist in the United Kingdom who is not as spicy as Tommy Robinson, he's more a travelogue journalist for interesting places. I've met him a couple times in the UK. He used to work for Sargon of Akkad on the Lotus Eaters, which is sort of an intellectual, philosophical channel. He was pulled over at Gatwick Airport and questioned for 6 hours by police. And I thought, I can't interview Tommy about that because he's in prison, but let's bring aboard Callum Darragh, who joins us now via Skype from the United Kingdom. Callum, great to see you again. Thanks for taking the time.
No problem, man. It's good to see you again.
Likewise. Did I properly describe the Terrorism Act? It has a lot of provisions, but this very powerful one lets police seize and question anyone, and you don't have the right to stay silent. It's so alien to our way of thinking. That's what happened to you. Why don't you tell our folks the story?
Sure. So, I mean, you're absolutely on the money. Basically, I was arriving back from the United States after doing some filming there, and I got to these e-gates, which are a place where you can just scan your passport, and a robot scans your face, and then if it matches, it lets you in, because all the paperwork's been done beforehand, right? I got to those, scan it as I usually do, and the thing fails. Do it again, and it fails. And I have met Tommy. I know his stories, and he's told me that's exactly what happens to him, because he's on the person of interest list in the UK. So he can't use those gates, because they just fail on him. So I wasn't that happy that happened, because then I look over at the desk where you've got to go normal immigration, where there's no e-gates. And behind it, there's 3 people looking at me in plain clothes. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be fun. Go up to the desk, hand over my passport. The immigration officer scans it in his machine. It fails. He looks like something's gone wrong. And then they come up and say, we'll take it from here. Take my passport. Hello, Callum. You're detained under the Terrorism Act, Section 3. And would you come this way, please? So then they take me into a side room, take my electronic devices off me, and demand my PIN codes. Like you said, I know, for example, Tommy's had this as well. And it's not just him. Lauren Southern, who was a Canadian visiting the UK, she had the same treatment. So it's not just British citizens this happens to. Foreigners are at risk as well. And they demanded the access. Lauren said no. So they deported her from the United Kingdom and banned her for life. Tommy said no, so they've charged him with the Terrorism Act. So I have enough trouble, because my job is traveling to interesting places, so I've got enough trouble getting those visas approved without having to explain a terrorism charge in the application. So I went, screw it. Yeah, here's the pins. Enjoy. So they take all my electronic devices, scan me, take literally everything off me, and then explain to me that I'm detained. I have no right to remain silent, because that was my first question. What are my rights to remain silent? And they explained there isn't one. Here's a pamphlet. I think I've got a pamphlet, in fact, they give to you and say you can read through that if you want. And yeah, you don't have a right to remain silent, which, as you say, the justification is that, well, if we're dealing with an imminent threat of terrorism, we need to get the information, we need to stop it if it's in the next few hours or whatever, right? But that's not what was happening in my case. They wanted information, and that was the way to get it. So that's not how it was intended. Oh, well.
Let me ask the obvious question. I know the answer, but our viewers are probably thinking, well, you must have been up to something. I mean, why don't you just answer the question for me? Are you a terrorist? Do you hang out with terrorists? Are you chummy with terrorists? Who are you that would cause them to pull you over using the terrorism law?
So here's the steel man of their position, which would be I go to interesting places like you mentioned. The first one I went to that was a big video that blew up was my trip to Afghanistan. And this was after the Taliban took over the country. So you're thinking, oh yeah, this guy went and met the Taliban, interviewed them, therefore he's on a list, he gets interviewed, right? The thing is, that was like 2 years ago. And I came back from that trip and stood around in customs waiting for someone to come and tap on my shoulder, and they didn't. And, okay, fine. So then I keep going to different places. I go to Russia, Kosovo, Transnistria, Zimbabwe, whatever. I just come back from the US and El Salvador. And when they were interviewing me, when I brought up the different stamps on my passport, like after we explained the trip I'd just been on, they couldn't have cared less about Afghanistan, which was the fun part. Because I'm like, oh, you're counterterrorism. You probably want to know if I want to join the jihad or whatever. And they're like, no, yeah, if you want to tell us about it, go ahead. Okay. I mean, one of the stories relevant to you guys in Canada is we ran into a checkpoint in Afghanistan. And I'm telling them this story, which is that I get pulled out. This Taliban guy is tapping me down. I speak some Pashto to him. And then he starts blowing back paragraphs of Pashto. I'm like, oh, crap. English, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, English. Points over some guy. English. Guy comes over. Hey, guys, how you doing? He's got a turban and an AK. We're like, that's not a Afghan accent.
Let me guess, a Canadian convert.
Yeah. He's a brown guy who I believe or presume was like a son of an immigrant and then went over to join the jihad in Afghanistan and was now running checkpoints in Kabul. And we're like, can we take pictures with you? Can we get your phone number to chat about like why you're here? And he's like, oh, no, I've got to go back to Canada someday.
Jeez. Well, you know what? And Justin Trudeau would let him back in even if he was known. So let me ask you this.
So you're thinking like that's the reason they would ask me, right? But when I told them that story, they couldn't have cared less about Afghanistan. The thing they were interested in was my time in Russia. And the other thing they were majorly interested in was my trip to the US, El Salvador, and my views on the West and the United Kingdom.
You know, that's so crazy. I mean, El Salvador, when I think of El Salvador, I'm old enough to remember about 40 plus years ago, there was a battle between El Salvador and Nicaragua. There was the communist there, Daniel Ortega. That's 40 years ago. Today, El Salvador is one of the freest, safest countries in Central America. Nayib Bukele is a pro-Bitcoin, pro-freedom guy who's cracked down on the gangs. I'd love to go to El Salvador one day. I think it's sort of a political interest story, a turnaround story. So the fact that they want to know your views on that, I find perplexing because El Salvador is a great success in 2025. It's not the El Salvador of 40 years ago. Can you tell us what they were asking you about that? And America, I mean, I was in America on Inauguration Day. It was an exhilarating time. I mean, I don't know your views on Trump. I presume you're sympathetic to him. Give me some of the questions that you were being asked by these counter-terror cops.
Sure. So when it came to the discussion, after I was told you've got no right to remain silent, take your fingerprints, take pictures of your face from every angle, etc., they said I could speak to a lawyer, in fact, and then spoke to the lawyer. that was free because I don't have a lawyer. So I called up the duty solicitor, and they told me, what are you detained for? I told them the paragraph I've been detained under. So I said, what do I do? And they're like, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Well, why are you detained? I don't know. Well, I don't know what to tell you. Well, it's just like the blind leading the blind.
Yeah, it sounds very helpful. I should tell you that when Tommy was pulled over, his lawyer did assist, and he said, I can't really do anything. I can't stop the questions, and we can't stop the seizure of your electronics. So, although it's sort of goofy to be given a phone call to a lawyer who knows nothing, if it makes you feel any better, Callum, even if you had the top lawyer in the UK, I don't think it would have stopped the humiliating and really unusual questioning. I just don't, that law is so powerful. It's sort of the British version of the Patriot Act, I think.
Well, there's nothing they can do. So yeah, I don't blame the lawyer. It's just, it shows off the ridiculousness of the situation where even the lawyer's like, I mean, her advice directly was answer the questions.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they will.
Give me a couple of questions that they would put to you, because I want to show the viewer that what has happened is that a law that was probably passed in good faith 20 plus years ago is now being weaponized against people who are critical of the state or unusual or perhaps somewhat eccentric in their politics. Tommy told me that when he was arrested under the Terrorism Act, they said immediately, we know you're not a terrorist. We're just going to now pump you for questions about your politics, your street rallies, your journalism. Like, they expressly said to him, we know you're not a terrorist. We're just using that law. Translation, we're abusing that law. Tell me some of the specifics they asked you.
Well, it's pretty much the same thing. It's like, we don't suspect you're engaged in anything. I'm like, well, why the hell am I detained then? But we don't need a reason to detain you. Great. So the conversation started with the trip I just did. And this was the one that we went into most detail, which is, okay, where did you leave the United Kingdom? Where did you go in the US? And I potted around. So I had to tell them, I started in the UK, got to Vegas, met these people, stayed for this long, did these things. Then I went to Miami and did these things. And then I went to El Salvador, then back to Vegas, and then somewhere else in the US. And the whole step of that way, they're like, how long did you stay in this place? Who did you meet in this place? What did you do in that place? So, I mean, I don't think the US is a breeding ground for Brits joining jihadism. So that's
especially Vegas.
Like,
that's where that'll corrupt you.
All the good jihadis go to Vegas.
That's right.
So that was odd. The time in El Salvador as well. What did they do? Who did I meet? In fact, they asked me before they searched devices, do you have anything of journalistic interest that would risk a source if we uncovered it? And I'm like, well, yes. The people I met in El Salvador, because El Salvador, yeah, in a lot of ways it's a success. There's some other side of that, which I'm going to release in the video upcoming. But so I'm explaining to them, yes, these things. And then when it gets to the questions, they're just like, well, who'd you meet? I'm like, I've got no right to remain silent. So what am I meant to do here? Like, you've got to give up your source.
Yeah. So if there was a confidential or legally protected or privileged source, and if you are compelled to answer, that's quite dangerous. What's the rules say about that? You just have to disclose it anyways?
If you don't answer their questions, you're impeding the investigation. Therefore, you've committed a crime under the Terrorism Act. So you will be charged.
So that's why a terrorist, they acknowledge you're not a terrorist. They ask you a question that would violate your journalistic ethics. And if you don't comply, then they'll deem you a terrorist. You're not a terrorist, ab initio. They admit that. But if you don't do exactly what they say, that's the terrorism.
That's how I presumed it was going to go. So you can do your best to answer the question without answering it. But that's about as much as a defensive you've got in that situation.
And how long did they detain you? I've heard it's 6 hours that they have. Is that correct? And how long did they keep you under those 6?
So the legal limit is 6. They kept me for 4, so within the law, as much as the law matters here.
Were you comfortable? Like, were you in a cell? Did they give you water or juice or something?
Yeah, they put you in a small room with nothing on the walls and then offer you water. So that's how that goes.
And how many of them were, and they were recording the whole thing, I presume?
Yeah, so there's a recording device in the room that's shown to you. There were 2 people, a lady and a guy that looks like Louis Theroux, interviewing me. I spoke to someone who works in legal stuff after all this, and he believes, or he told me, because I was asking when I was talking to the lawyer, I'm assuming that the whole thing's bugged. And he said, not only do I think that's likely, I think legally it's mandated.